The Inspired Insights podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered health advice. This podcast is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
Please note that this podcast may contain discussions on sensitive topics such as mental illness, suicide, and substance use. If you are experiencing a behavioral health crisis or need support, please contact the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by calling 988 or visiting www.988lifeline.org.
Soren, welcome back.
Yes, welcome back to this week's episode of the Inspired Insights podcast.
And we have guests.
Yeah.
I love having guests. I'm going to let you both introduce yourself, and then we'll learn more about what we want to talk about. You want to start?
Yeah. I am Sam White. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a medical case manager for people living with HIV and AIDS in the northernmost counties in Maine. And I'm also one of the lead organizers for Bangor Pride.
Yeah, and thanks for doing what you do, both in your work life and in your volunteer pride.
My name is Emma. I do accounts receivable. So not the most exciting job, but outside of
Important.
important nonetheless. But outside of work, I've been helping with Pride. The lead of the we have the art committee and Cooley, so the history committee. Hard to keep track. But yeah, besides that, just that's about it.
Yeah, thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
So we'll get to your inspired insights because I know you came really prepared. I'm going to start inspired insight this time, right?
For it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what we planned for.
Chris, it's all you.
It's all me. So my inspired insight has nothing to do with pride, or maybe it does. We'll see how the conversation goes. But I was thinking about language, and I was thinking about, partly because of your mom, I was thinking about how in other languages, they have words that summarize entire concepts that we might not have in the English language. And the example was the word lagom, and I might not be saying that right, but it's Swedish, and it means just right. Not too hot, not too cold, not too hard, not too soft, just right. It's a word that I don't think we have a equivalent for in the English language. And I just think that's kind of cool and beautiful that these other languages have developed that take entire concepts that take us 14 words to describe, and they just do it in one 6-letter word.
And yet we still have those same experiences that they're attempting to articulate.
Right.
Which really attaches to my inspired insight that I was interested in sharing. And that inspired insight is simply how universal art is. I think we as moderns tend to view art and eras of it as very time period distinct. However, I think the emotions that art attempts to articulate are extremely universal. And what has sort of put this at top of mind for me is recently reading Shakespeare. I've had the opportunity to read As You Like It in class for my AP Lit class. And at first, I thought of it as highly derivative, as Shakespeare draws most of his tropes from Greek New Comedy, a field of playwriting that I think myself quite familiar with, like writers such as Menander and such. And then, obviously, you have Roman writers. Obviously. But as I've started to read more Shakespeare, I have sort of gained greater appreciation for it rather than viewing it as derivative, which broadly it is. I view it as a more intentional pursuit of these universal human concepts, right? And I think all art is attempting to articulate feelings, thoughts, conflicts that we all have internally. We are all the same specimen, broadly speaking. And all art is trying to do is articulate some of, or rather show some of these sort of idiosyncrasies of the human species.
I've never read.
Period. I know that you.
I've never read. Was it As You Like It?
Yeah.
I've never read As You Like It. What would you say are the universal themes?
I think in As You Like It, we see a really big conflict between rationality and human emotion. That being sort of the conflict between like making a responsible decision in love and the brutish, like raw emotion inspired by love.
Oh,
And I think that's a very universal human concept. This sort of battle that we have internally between our pathos and logos.
oh, you lost me again. So with you, you lost me again.
Pathos being our more like emotional side and logos being our highly logical side. Okay. Yeah. And I sort of see this development of this idea of like the Aristotelian ethic. That being that virtue lies in between two conflicting vices, yet exists on a continuum. Right? Like in the play As You Like It, the forest and the court are strongly contrasted. As the court is highly superficial and the forest is very raw. However, sort of the rawness and brutishness of the forest is vilified on one end, and the highly superficial hierarchy of the court is vilified on the other. And we see Shakespeare attempt to sort of weave together a idea of virtue that exists in between those two conflicting ideals. And I think it's really beautiful that I can read classical works and then see the exact same ideas be articulated by works of the 1500s and modern works today. So it's something that I find really exciting about the humanities. Although I don't intend to pursue them, it is something that I like spending my time.
And it will always be a passion of yours, whether you get a grade for it or not.
Indeed.
I love that. Thanks, Soren. And Emma Sam, you are going to share an inspired insight with us.
Yes.
Sure.
I think that off of what Soren said, especially throughout time, I think historically we're kind of a history project. The inspired part of it is all of the elder LGBTQ people that we've met and all their stories really do they cross space and time, and it doesn't matter where you are in country or in the world or time. It's kind of this connection of love that we see. And I think it's important to preserve those stories, because if we don't, they're going to disappear.
Yeah.
So we're just being inspired as all scoop one. They lived to know, guys.
Yeah. Anything you want to add to that?
Emma did a great job.
Emma's done a great job.
Add on it. Working with a bunch of elder queers, I get to hear their stories, and it's more focused on the 80s and 90s and the pandemic that the younger generation were aware of. And
Yeah.
I was younger in the pandemic too, so it's probably inspiring to hear their stories.
In your work world,
Yeah, my work world.
your work. Yeah. So in the context of meeting clients, it is inspiring you to do something with
Their stories.
their stories.
Yeah.
I have a question. Do you guys feel that stories are valuable because of their social utility and their teaching aspect, or inherently valuable as they are part of sort of the human experience, right?
Oh, that's a good question. I think both.
I think.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that as well.
Is there a ratio that you would assign, or like why do you guys value these stories in particular, and why have you guys taken onto yourself to elevate these stories?
I know that personally, going through, trying to figure out who you are and growing up and everything like that, I think that there's value in the universality of it. I know that personally, I actually, one of my groups that I personally into is elder groups. So I was the youngest by like 50 years. I met them all, and we play games, and it's great. But I started hearing all their stories and started hearing, like they went through their first marriage and to, figure out who they were until after or whatever. Sort of makes you feel a little bit more human, and that life isn't perfect. There are errors, but they're errors. They're misjudgments that actually help you find the right path.
Yeah.
And I think that there's value in that as, wow, I can identify with that, but I think there's also value in it as like, wow, I'm a person who did this, and I'm able to share this with someone. Yeah.
Yeah. I think when we first chatted about your project and thinking about Pride and how this project kind of ties in to Pride, because I know you're actively recruiting folks who might be interested in sharing their stories as part of this project. Um, can you talk a little bit about how you plan on collecting? Like, what are your thoughts on how you're going to gather those stories? And yeah, I just want to hear from you, like, what your plans are.
So we're doing basically how people want to share.
Yeah.
So we've reached out to you both where you're more familiar with collecting audio of videos if people are comfortable with that. Some people might have photos to share or just prefer to write down their story. We're letting people do anonymous or initials.
Yeah. And now that you've seen how the sausage gets made, are you regretting absolutely reaching out now that the high-tech studio is no, and the minute we chatted, I was like, yep, this is important. And Soren and I talk about these different generational perspectives and how much has changed, but also how much has stayed the same. That's a theme that keeps coming up over and over again. Um, and just recognizing that there's so much power in the sharing of that story, both as the teller of the story, maybe there's some healing or some just coming to terms with some pieces of our stories that process can bring about, and they're being open to learning from it. And so there's the validation that might come up in other folks who can resonate with the pieces of the story that it maybe for the storyteller brought some pain, but for the listener it might bring some healing or some growth opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important way to learn. I mean, just culturally, I think that we've spoken word and learning from each other's histories has always been something that we've done. And I think that it can get muddled, potentially, especially how we're hearing stories and whether they're true or not. So I think that getting from the sources of people who have lived these experiences is a really, really important.
Yeah. And what I know now, and Soren and I talk about current events all the time, is it feels like there is such an intentional, coordinated effort to erase
Mm.
members of our community, members of our country, our planet, our world. Um, and so I think the word preserving is a really important word that you used in describing the project, that by preserving stories, you're really allowing those voices to carry on in spite of all these attempts to silence
Yes.
that are happening. And for me, that's beautiful and so essential that we provide people an opportunity to be heard and make sure that those voices, regardless of what's happening around us, stay in the conversation.
Yes. For our listeners, how are you guys going to be distributing these stories? And this is sort of a separate question, but do you guys have any particular anecdotes in your quest to collect queer history that were particularly striking to you?
Mm.
So I don't know if we have like an official plan yet to share it. We're gonna hopefully have stuff on our website.
I know that, yeah, we're also potentially maybe going to be collaborating with some other groups who have been collecting stories already, especially with Southern Maine, and then Seacoast in Hampshire has also been doing some stuff as well, which we're already collaborating some stuff with the Charlie Howard Vigil that we're going to be doing. Yeah. And I think that looking at it, I don't know, I get excited. I'm sorry, I get excited thinking about it on a grand scale because, like, thinking years from now, like, what if we could do like a whole New England collective? Yeah, queer history, and I think that's really inspiring to me to think about. So we might not know the exact platform yet, but I do know that we've had some interest already. I know that Jim with the Gay Men's Chorus, he has some memorabilia and some stories that he wants to share. So we're trying to figure out, maybe we can house that at some point or have the historical societies figure that out. But just sort of all over preserving the history, whether it be, stories, the actual, buttons or anything like that.
Yeah, and I love the multimedia approach to it. Like, it might be audio, it might be written, it might be poetry, it might be art, like as Soren was chatting about too. Like I love that you are providing a venue for people to share that piece of themselves in any way that feels authentic for them. Yeah. And how important that is. And you started the process, right? You started collecting some stories. Yeah. So I love Soren's question about, uh, obviously, without naming names or giving too much away, what are some of the themes you're picking up on already?
So somebody reached out. Do they have a bunch of photos of old protests and stuff?
Oh, wow.
We do have to get permission to use them, because of the owner. I'm hoping some of my clients will be fine sharing their stories. Because when I first started, I wanted to actually get to know them. Um, and one of them told me, his address book, he had to start keeping it at pencil because he was going to so many funerals a week.
Oh, wow. And get some ability to race. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would have been like the early to mid 80s.
Yeah.
He wasn't diagnosed until the early 90s, but
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, you mentioned permission, and obviously consent is a giant aspect here, and knowing you both, you're having those conversations with people, and people know what they're kind of getting into, and there's choice, right? There's the ability to participate or not. And maybe it's never going to be done, but when it feels done-ish for the two of you, um what comes next? Like, what is your thought around and maybe it's never gonna be done.
probably volume 2.
Yeah, yeah.
I tend to like thinking of it as like this sort of like living documentary, I mean, ongoing thing that I think, yeah, just growing. Like I said, like maybe not even just Maine or New England or whatever. Maybe it becomes a big, giant historical collective
Yeah,
that we might be able to preserve somehow.
yeah.
Pressure's on now. Yo, Maurice.
But you've already mentioned a couple groups that are actively doing this work in northern New England, and I have to believe there are efforts going on across the country that maybe as our listeners are tapping into this particular episode, like if folks have suggestions or ideas to reach out to us and share information. I know for me, growing up, and I'm trying to like think about what ages that would have been, probably my early 20-ish as I was coming into terms with all of this stuff. One of my go-to sources of validation and comfort maybe was anthologies of whether they were writers or just average folks telling their story. And one of the books that stands out to me that is I've had it for decades now was a book called Queer 13, and it was writers writing stories about them being 13 and just how awkward and painful and exciting and exhilarating being 13 is for any human. And then you add this dimension of sexual orientation or gender identity or a feeling of a lack of gender and what that adds to that 13-year-old experience. And but for me, it was so powerful to read words of other folks who maybe do a little bit of what I was feeling.
Yeah. I feel like we as humans understand the world through narratives. We understand the world through stories and interpersonal dynamics. And I think what's really powerful about what you guys are trying to do regarding history is you are approaching queer history not as a concise narrative in which there were like broad large plot points and like looking at it more microscopically rather than macroscopically. And I think that's a extremely as Chris said, extremely impactful tool for like social agitation and convincing individuals to stand up for others is utilizing empathy. And the stories of individuals can utilize empathy so much more than a bunch of aggregated statistics.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just it's powerful. Like I just keep coming back to that word of power. There's power in community. There's power in feeling of belonging. There's power in knowing you're not the only one. And I think also it cannot be underscored enough that in the times we're living in, that it is essential to remember that there is a human behind every one of these stories.
Yeah.
There's a human there. And I know the four of us around this table believe in the value of every human, their life as every human. And maybe three of us around the table if aren't. But there's value in every human. And we cannot forget that with everything happening around us, every story matters. Every story matters in this tapestry of humanity that we're all kind of, some of us are more threaded through it than others, but we're all part of this giant tapestry, right? And giving people voice in a world that's trying to silence that voice is giant.
Yeah.
It's giant.
Regarding the modern circumstances which we found ourselves in, do you guys think that some of your motivation to start this project was reactionary?
That's a great question.
For me, no.
I think it was a little bit of both. Like, I definitely think it's been something that I've been interested in doing for a long time, but I think my efforts have been increased in everything with the community as reactionary. Yeah, so I don't think it's necessarily the preserving of the stories because I think that's overall important, but I do think that, trying to be more involved with the community and just as much support as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I've heard that Pride has been a lot more out there the previous years.
Yep.
But the history project itself is not reaction.
You've been thinking about this project for a while, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've been working professionally with older folks for a while in the queer community. For me, the word that comes up